Hello everyone. So in Indian Express there was a very small article on weighing in on the efficacy of female leadership. Basically, it talks about the role of females as leadership roles during the pandemic. Now, this editorial is important because these are certain very miscellaneous topics that comes up during our optional paper. If we look at the questions are very diverse. So they range from discuss the problems of working women in India, right? So, what are the sociological problems of working women in India? So, basically, on the economic relations and the structural problems that women face as while participating in economic activity. Then there was a question on nature of atrocities on married women. Then education of women and the role and the social status in modern Indian society. Muslim women and divorce. This was something in the news. Then educational problems of rural women. Now this is so specific, right? So these questions are very specific, and these are generally inspired from the editorials and day-to-day happenings. So reading these editorials becomes important because as soon as you get a question, if you have read these editorials, you will be in a much better position in writing an answer for this than people who are reading it for the first time. So that is the role of editorials in optional paper, especially 2 and 1 as well. So for questions like these, which are very wide and very broad, what you have to do, you have already prepared your the main subject. You have already worked upon gender as a topic as such. Now from there you have to relate to the question and give some factual analysis along with that and try and contextualize it in that direction. And reading newspapers gives you the fodder as well as gives you the perspective and also the confidence to write an exam. Now, in terms of women's role as a leadership role, now leadership role, what is it? It is a public space. Let me just decode these things. Now, it is a public space. Now, since within the we all know that gender difference is a very dominant theme that goes on in sociology. Now, in any society, in most of the societies rather, there is a sexual division of labor based upon biology. So women would be considered as a part of the private sphere, part of the family, the household, and childbearing activity. So because of the biology, they are curtailed to a specific kind of a sexual division of labor, whereas men are considered to be into the public space, and they're considered to be much adequate to participate in economic activities, to be in the public space. So political leadership and being a part of the political elite is definitely a public figure and a public role. This is the reason why women have not been encouraged into this space. If we try and bring out the thinkers, Parsons was one person who actually promoted sexual division of labor and gender differentiation in public and private space. So he said that women's role is expressive. So as women, the role of the women is supposed to be expressive and emotional, and it is adult stability, personal adult stability or personalization. Whereas for men, the whole idea is instrumental. So they are more inclined towards achievement, material nature, and into the market relation. And he was talking about a capitalist structure. So within a capitalist structure, this made a lot of sense because when you have when you curtail the role of women into the household and the into the family sphere, they help out in the way that capitalism functions, because men are working outside, and men the role of the women is the role of the men is restricted to the instrumental in the achievement work. So it helps capitalism to function because the household management is done by an unpaid labor. So this is how the whole concept of unpaid labor also functions. Now, the role of women is gender based. The sexual division of labor is one thing. It is biologically determined. Women are supposed to do a certain kind of work because there is sexual division of labor based upon biology. Now, for all this, the radical feminist would blame patriarchy, the structural patriarchy, which manifests in the form of socialization from the birth to adulthood. That women are supposed to wear a certain kind of dress, men are supposed to have like a certain kind of toys. This is how it starts, and the socialization process kind of creates a binary in terms of how men are supposed to be and how women are supposed to be. And definitely there's a lot of scholarship on masculinity as well, that it creates a lot of emotional turbulence for men as well, because the society projects them to be masculine, and the society expects them to have a certain kind of social role, which is again very much dominating for them as well. Then socialist feminists, they would blame capitalism as a structure that kind of creates barriers for women. So capitalism, they believe, is in any way a very unequal kind of a societal structure, and the divisions are basically manifested because of capitalism. Now, Anne Oakley is somebody who would deny the sexual division of labor in society based upon biology. She would say that she studied a lot of societies, different societies, and she said that it is mentioned in your Hal Lombus. You can just write it somewhere, in your notes, so that you can use that in different questions. Now, she said that sexual division of labor based upon biology is not something universal. It varies from society to society. And she gave an example of Mbuti pygmies, who now this particular society does not define men's role and women's role in this way. Rather, both men and women perform both the activities. For example, men would also perform activities related to child caring and household activities and related to family, whereas women would also perform activities related to economic aspect. She would also give example, and there has been a lot of studies on primitive societies where this sexual division of labor does not work. Feminists argue that it is a very modern idea and it is a very Western idea because it serves the interests of the capitalism and the ruling class and patriarchy as such. Now, moving on to this particular editorial, the idea is that there is an inherent bias, and within the whole categorization of the leadership role, and there are perceptions that the role of authority and leadership is very much adequate for men rather than women because they would not be very effective. So the author starts by talking about the lack of representation in parliamentary panel examining a bill to increase the legal age of marriage for women from 18 to 21. So questions like these, when policy changes happen on issues related to women, the recent one was the legal age of marriage. Women were not agents of that social change. So when you have legal change and it is supposed to bring some social change in terms of gender equality, it is very important that women be the agents of social change. It is important that women are included into the policy formulation so that that change happens in a much, much better form. So there are prejudices about the efficacy of women in political roles which needs to be eradicated. She brings out a study was conducted by the US report, which stated that the female governors had fewer COVID related deaths. Now, the idea of this editorial is not to say that female leadership is the best and it overpowers, it should overpower the male leadership. The idea is to attack the inherent bias, right? Nobody is saying that female leadership is far better than the male leadership, but it is to attack the whole structural inequality that has been portrayed in the form that because of sexual division of labor, men perform much better in economic sphere than women. So for that, this example was portrayed that when you talk about Germany, Taiwan, and New Zealand, they have women heading their governments. And these countries, they manage the pandemic much better than their neighbors. And the study was also conducted by US reports that states that which have female governors had fewer COVID related deaths, perhaps because female governors, they acted much decisively on the whole idea of stay at home orders, which was now why does this happen? Because women, it was analyzed that women in general, they value the whole idea of life over economic and material gain. So they acted much swiftly on the whole idea of on the whole idea of lockdown and stay at home orders, and also on emotional stability. So they were more effective in times of crisis. Now, there is also this segment on charismatic leadership that you should go back to Weber and try and understand what is the charismatic leadership. It is basically driven by the personality, by the qualities of the individual, and how it motivates the masses. And because of the inherent qualities of the individual, the authority is governed. Now, charismatic female leadership is also something that can come as a question, that how do you see charismatic female leadership, and write a short note on it. So we have charismatic leaders around the world, and try and give few glaring examples where the whole idea of gender stereotyping can be broken up. And for example, Indira Gandhi was called the only man in the cabinet. Now, why was she called the only man in the cabinet? Which is also very, which is not a good way to represent a woman in a leadership role. Now, the representation of women in political sphere is so meager that she was considered as the only male in the cabinet, somebody who was taking actions very strongly and staunchly. Now, she was considered as the only male in the cabinet. Rather, we should the inclusive process should be such that men and women have nearly equal representation in the economic sphere and in the political sphere. Now, a study was conducted by Nobel laureate Esther Duflo and Raghavendra Chattopadhyay on the whole idea of female leadership within the pradhans and the gram panchayats, and they found that because of the reservation of one-third reservation for women, it was found that the female pradhans, they invested more in rural infrastructure that served better the needs of their own gender. For instance, they worked upon investing on providing easy access to drinking water facilities, since the collection of drinking water is primarily the responsibility of women. So when women are included into such positions, the crisis in terms of day-to-day happenings, so drinking water facility, the issue of female girl child attending school, and the menace of sexual harassment and teasing which goes on, and it also leads to the whole concept of missing women. So women, when they are at that particular role, because of their experience as being a woman, they also look into these matters and which is very important for the development of the society. So, right to vote in the public place was something, it is interesting that within India, and it is something that we need to be very proud of, that soon after independence, women's suffrage rights were given to women's suffrage right was provided to women. So women had the agency to choose during election. Whereas in mature democracies, we find that though women were allowed to vote, it took several decades, and they were allowed to vote in 1920s during the interwar period. So the political right was given to women much late, and it was the whole social movement that came up after which women were given the right to vote. Whereas in India, the social movement, it is interesting that the social movement for women was also propagated by men. So during colonial period, we had a lot of social thinkers who were working on women-centric rights and the social evils. So, political rights were given to women much early as compared to the West, and that is something that is great. But then there is an underrepresentation of women in an Indian legislature. So, just 14% of the total strength of the Lok Sabha is governed by women. This was the report by Inter-Parliamentary Union, which said that we have 143 rank out of 192 countries in terms of the representation of women in legislature. For instance, it's bizarre that Rwanda, which is a very small nation, it has 60% of seats occupied by women. So what the author is suggesting, that we need a level playing field through appropriate legal measures, and what is needed is that the women's reservation bill must be taken up very seriously. In 2010, it was passed by the Rajya Sabha, but the Lok Sabha and the state legislatures need to give their approval. So increased female representation and policy making goes a long way in improving the perception about female effectiveness in leadership role. So I drawing the connection that if you have female representation and policy making, it will also give the indication that females are very effective in leadership roles. It decreases the bias among the voters against women candidates. Now, in majority, what happens is that during voting also, when women are going for the vote, most of the times in rural sector and even in urban sectors, the decision on who to vote and which party to vote and which candidate to vote is very much pre-decided for women as well. So they vote according to the household and whatever the meals in the household they suggest. So that is one thing. And in general, males, this because of the socialization and because of lack of behavioral change, what is happening is that they are against women candidates in general. So it results in poor female politicians who are contesting and winning the election. So what do we take away? That in order to bring a social change or in terms of gender equality, a legal system needs to be through policy and legal measures. We need to bring that change. So women's reservation bill is one dimension through which we can break those barriers. And we have a very interesting example that when women are in the forefront, for instance, in Germany, Taiwan, and New Zealand, and the female governors in US states, they managed pandemic very well. And we have female charismatic leaders. So this is one thing, that the sexual division of labor is, by biology, is not something universal, as Anne Oakley would say. It is something which is cultural. So depending upon the culture, we have the division of labor. So in order to break that stereotype, it is important to bring social change also through legal measures. Thank you.